I get asked the question on the dumbing down of yoga often. So let's explore this. There are three things that we got to look at. One is how the entire science of yoga is now represented predominantly as an asana practice. Secondly, we look at how the word yogi, or what is required or expected from a yoga practitioner, wisdom traditionally, today means something much less, maybe just flexibility, and also how the word yogi is now a customer segment. And the third thing we'll look at is we'll look through a historical viewpoint, but where do we go from here? So friends, for most of us, we may have begun our yoga journey through an asana class, a yoga class, and then we discovered so much more. I've been teaching for the last 22 years, and I was very fortunate to be able to live with my guru for many years and to explore the length and breadth. But more importantly, I've been very fortunate to see how the global expansion of yoga has happened. From 2000 onwards, when Time magazine covered Christy Turlington sitting in a yoga pose on the cover, it's just grown and grown exponentially. So that's been fascinating. Now, when we look at asana, today, I'm curious to know if somebody were to get into yoga today, what would they perceive yoga to be? A lot of the times you see yoga on Instagram, and it's predominantly a picture. We all do this. And I would like to say that all of us, me included, have played a role in projecting yoga as asana, but then it's been an effort to show that there's more to the subject. Now, on an Instagram post, it becomes very difficult, which means that for a modern, a young person entering yoga today, they may assume that getting into a handstand is advanced yoga. Well, it may be advanced asana. Even that is questionable, because asana, an advanced asana, means you can just sit in meditation. But for a new person, they may think that that is advanced yoga itself. And friends, when we begin to understand yoga, we look at the root text, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, 196 aphorisms, sutras that describe yoga darshan. Now, what's interesting is that of the 196, only 3 describe asana. That's about 1%. 1% of the subject of yoga is asana. And another 1% is perhaps describing pranayama. What else is there? Breathing, right? What else is there apart from asana and breathing in yoga is fascinating. So if you're a student of yoga, you want to know what is Patanjali describing. Ethics, morals, yes. Asana, pranayama, meditation, but so much more. And this is what we say when we describe the dumbing down of yoga. Over the last 5,000 years, Patanjali has written his text about 2200 years ago. Over the last couple of millennia, how has yoga become something that can be replaced in a fitness class context? So for a modern practitioner going in and getting into fitness today, you have choices. Should I do yoga, or should I do Pilates, or should I do... Now that, friends, is just asana, and we all know this. But it's not as exciting to call it just asana as it is yoga. The challenge there is, how do you ensure that your student or any practitioner understands that this is just a part of the process? And it is not that asana is not important. It is very important, because it is the basis of stillness, from wherein breath and then meditation we explore. However, it's not all of it. Friends, after Patanjali's time, and his work is predominantly an understanding of the mind, is Manish, is this mind the watcher or the watched? For most of us, friends, we have a distinction between us and our body. My back is paining, but we say, I am depressed. great master who trained Patabi Joyce, Ashtanga Yoga tradition, and B.K.S. Iyengar, possibly the most famous teacher of the 20th century. Now they focused a lot on asana. With Ashtanga Yoga, it's interesting that the name was chosen Ashtanga. Patanjali's 8 limbs, yam, niyam, ethics and morals, asana, posture, pranayama, breathing, pratyahara, sense withdrawal, dharana, concentration, dhyan, meditation, samadhi, an ecstatic state where you are devoid of a sense of self in the way that we treat the mind. Friends, this Ashtanga, this word, was used by Patabi Joyce to call his work Ashtanga Yoga, while it's predominantly asana with energetic bandha locks and with breathing in the postures. So, what this meant is that for a Western audience or for a non-Indian audience, the word yoga meant a class with a certain range of physical postures. In the Indian tradition, the word yogi would refer to somebody living in the Himalayas, maybe a recluse, a renunciate, almost a monk, who would come down once in a few years and you would meet and you would go to him for wisdom. You would not go to him to find out how to stretch your hamstrings or so on. So, Ashtanga Yoga was the first yoga system in the world designed for fitness, and from there, more. So that is the building block from there. Initially a spiritual practice, yoga was also used as a health practice, then began in the last century, last 80 years, and eventually in the last 20 years, predominantly, more and more of fitness. So that's a little bit about the way the yoga journey has moved. Friends, when we talk about yoga itself, we're generally today referring to asanas. Now, if you're doing an asana class and your students are most interested in just some flexibility, some movement, some vinyasa flows, and you put in a mantra in the beginning and maybe loka samasta mantra in the ending, that doesn't make it classical or traditional. It's nice, but there's so much more. And it's very important for the people who are interested. Which brings me to a very important point in all of this. Yoga does not need to try to mimic the past. It doesn't need, in my opinion, it doesn't need to be pseudo-traditional or authentic. A lot of yoga and yoga teachers are caught up in this whole dilemma of trying to appear authentic. I personally think yoga is a science. It needs to be effective. It needs to be effective. Just like in physics, we work with science. Today, we respect Newton, and we understand all that he has done, but we don't get stuck to only Newton's worldview. It is a science that has to move on. Yoga is not a dogma. You cannot get stuck to saying that this is what Patanjali said, only this has to be done. This is what Matsyendranath said, this is what Vivekananda said, only no. It cannot be like that. Everybody has furthered the science. But for you, you got to ask the question, what do I want from my practice? I want physical health perhaps. Then do I really need to go through all the Sanskritization? Friends, which brings us to a very important point, cultural adaptation. In the Vedic times, there were different forms of yoga. With Patanjali, he's not the only yoga voice in his own time either. There are schools where Patanjali's work is dualistic, the watcher and the watched. There are schools of yoga that are non-dualistic, similar to Vedanta. But Patanjali is considered the classical. So you can see that it keeps evolving. With Hatha Yoga, it evolves even further. The physical practices become even more important, and so it has to evolve. So if your focus is health, if your focus is mental peace, then approach it like that. Take the subject, understand the science of it, use it for yourself. You don't have to be caught up in any dogmatic approach. Friends, this is very important because we've suffered so much from dogmatic approaches globally, in every tradition, in every religion, in every institution. And so much so, even in yoga, we have a, a lot of people who misuse the, the, the journey itself, and you have a lot of abuse of power, whether it is with Bikram Chaudhary and hot yoga, whether it is with Yogi Bhajan and Kundalini yoga, even with Pattabhikas, we have reports and sort of instances, the Ashtanga thing, we've got Swami Satyanand Saraswati. So, a lot of the time, there have been these grey areas that need to be voiced out, and therefore, we don't want dogma. All of them have done some beautiful work with yoga. They've added to the science, but we don't want the dogma. It is science, and we don't want to be attached to the scientists. If we can give that as an analogy, it's not a perfect analogy, of course. The personality cult needs to be taken out, and the subject needs to flourish. So, friends, this is very important that ask yourself, what do I want from the practice? I want maybe mental peace. Maybe I want physical health. So then what is the best? Is Surya Namaskar the best fit for what I want? Is pranayama the best fit for what I want? Sit with the teacher, understand, explore whether the person is very, very rigid and dogmatic in their approach. Ask them, what can you take? Yoga, however beautiful it is, you are more beautiful. Yoga should serve you, and you should be able to take what works for you rather than you force fit yourself into any system, any posture, any methodology, any sort of cultish group. So figure out how you can take it. This is what I'm getting at. When I say the dumbing down of yoga, it's not the fact that it's become just asana. Yes, we all know that it's become just asana, but we want it to be more. It's not the fact that it's become so consumerist, where a yogi is now considered a consumer segment, where the person is interested in buying some yoga mats, yoga clothes, yoga vacation, and so on and so forth. But it is much more than that. For it to be and continue to be much more than that in the coming times, you have to question everything. As a yoga practitioner, you have to question everything. Yes, spend the time to study, and for that you may need some years where you explore one path. But then, after you've mastered one path, then you start to say, okay, now in my path, I've studied these mantras, these asanas, these pranayama, and so on. Now, I'm comfortable with it, I've understood the purpose of it, I've got the discipline, I've got the clarity of mind to ask the right questions on who am I. Then, can I drop this? It doesn't really fit with my worldview anymore. And you've got to keep checking. What you were doing in your 20s, you will not be doing in your 30s, you will not be doing in your 40s. Your worldview changes, your economic view changes, the social views change. In the same way, your spiritual views need to constantly evolve. Do these practices still serve me? If the answer is yes, please do it. And if the answer is no, question. It will never be dumbed down if every practitioner questions what they are practicing. The journey of mentorship happens with a teacher, a senior teacher. But beyond that, it is yours to explore what it is. Friends, once again, if this doesn't resonate with you, if you feel that it's better to follow a lineage that you think has been there forever, so be it. They cannot be just one way. I'm sharing the way that works for me. I spent 7 years living with my teacher. I had studied psychology before. Psychology was not satisfying to me because it didn't teach me my mind as meditation taught me my mind. But then when I was 30, it was time to leave. I don't like being part in any lineage. I like to be free in my own approach to what I want to practice and not. Sometimes this may not work for everybody, for sure not. Maybe you prefer the structure and it works for you, then so be it. So friends, once again, when we talk about the dumbing down of yoga, we feel sad that it's only become this narrow band of asana where some posture, you do some posture and you feel that okay, this is advanced, well it's not. And I've spent enough time with yogis traveling the mountains, and you'll find that what you're doing will look advanced, but that person is just being. That's advanced yoga. The second thing that we discussed is how it should not be dogmatic, and for that you have to keep questioning, is it serving me? Is it serving me? Is it serving me? And constantly sort of finding what works for you. If you have found what works for you and you don't need to change it, that is also fine. Because to say that it should not be dogmatic itself is dogma. Hope you get it. And finally, friends, understanding that when you practice yoga, be careful not to become a market segment, not to become somebody that anybody can sell yoga products or yoga ideas. Take the time to ask, how old are these lineages? Are they really that old? Or is it just a good marketing spin? If you go into a yoga shala, if there is a statue there of Shiva or something, if there's reverence, great. If it is just being put there to make it look yogic, if a few mantras are put in there just to make it sound traditional, you can indulge. It's great fun, it's nice, if it helps, it's beautiful. But if you feel that no, this doesn't work for you, please note that none of this needs to work for you and it will still be yoga. Because yoga is science, questioning, and this is very important. Thanks, friends. If you ever want to have a conversation with me about the subject of yoga and where it's headed in the future, please share your comments, and happy to speak to you and to understand what training could be like to keep the traditions intact, but to question them also as we get more and more research into what it means to be human. Yoga essentially is asking, who am I? And we want all the data, ancient and modern. Thanks.